Stephen Akanbi, and I'm an electronic engineer by training and a telecommunication engineer by profession. Back in the day, there's always this talk about, in the newspapers, we used to read this year of the Hausa Fulani hegemony, Then we used to hear of the Kaduna Mafia, This was supposed to be a sort of shadow organization comprising of mostly northern elite who controlled everything that happened in Nigeria. And then it was easy to believe because when you looked at big corporations in Nigeria like the NNPC, for example, the NTA, you usually see a lot of the directors were from the north. Yeah, so there was that talk of, there's this progressive agenda. But I think what it was, I think after the Civil War, before the Civil War, from what I know from history, the Igbo ethnic group used to be, they were predominantly in the civil service, a lot of them in the civil service. But after the Civil War, that changed, and there was some sort of kind of recrimination, where a lot of the Igbos were now exempted because they actually moved back to Biafra, and when they came back, I don't think all of them got all the positions back. So I think because of that now, maybe that space was now filled by the Hausas and the Yorubas, who are the two other major ethnic groups. But yes, you can't deny the fact that there's always that struggle for supremacy, position, and control amongst the different ethnic groups in Nigeria. And also, yes, some individuals, like even the president, might actually be somehow, affected by it, because he might want to favor his own people that look like him. For example, when he went into office, he might want to surround himself with people that he feels are loyal to him, which anybody will do anyway, let's be frank. Even in the corporate organizations, people do it. In corporate organizations, there's politics where, okay, you want to make an appointment of people next to you, work with you, you want people that you are close to, people that you know. It happens. You can't rule that out. Yeah, that is, it happens everywhere. Yeah, it's possible. It might not be that all the Fulanis have come together and say, okay, we want to rule or we want to take over the country. I don't think that is the case. It might just be a case of a few individuals that are positioned who feel, let's do something for our people. Let's be together. Let's help each other. Yeah, it can happen. It's possible. In that way, maybe making appointments might look lopsided because you always see them maybe appointing somebody that is from their own ethnic group. Yeah, it is possible. It can happen. The Edo State law against open grazing is a welcome development if it can be enforced. But we shouldn't say it's against the Fulanis. I mean, we should desist from labeling any group or ethnic group or any tribe in making utterances or declarations, because a law in a country is not made to actually affect a certain people. If you do that, it's discrimination. So don't say it's a law against the Fulanis. And you cannot also use a bold brush to paint all the Fulanis as terrorists. That is wrong. To my own understanding, if you look at the Nigerian landscape, or if you look at the Nigerian map, for example, there are large areas that you can call ungoverned spaces. These are forest areas, places that are not, populated at all. There are areas that are sparsely populated, and there are areas that are, not populated at all. And these are very vast areas. And it so happened that these areas that I'm talking about, mostly forests, are well known, to the Fulani tribe, who have been nomads over the years. They move their cattle, pursuing greenery, for grazing purposes. And they do that migration, I think, on an annual basis, coming down from the north down to the south, taking their animals to graze. And it so happened now, because of the rise in criminality in Nigeria and many other factors, do not discount the destabilization of Libya as well, which has caused so many weapons to proliferate across the sub-Saharan African region. because now there's an easy access and flow of all kinds of illicit materials through Libya from Europe down into sub-Saharan Africa. And some of those illicit materials are weapons and ammunition. So now, a lot of criminal gangs in the whole sub-Saharan region, they have now easy access to weapons. Because that was not the case before, when Libya was being governed by Muammar Gaddafi, who had a very strong hold on that area. And he was actually in agreement and in many agreements and accord with the Europeans to safeguard that Mediterranean coastline, you know. And during his government, during his time, the crime rate and the criminal activity around the Mediterranean towards the Libyan coast was reduced. It's not like now you have human trafficking, drug trafficking, everything going through there, because there are different kind of criminal gangs operating out of Libya, because Libya is in a state of what I would call a sectarian warfare situation, where you have different sects fighting for supremacy and control of resources in that area. It's chaotic, and that kind of environment allows for porosity. Now in Nigeria, we have so many ungoverned spaces. These ungoverned spaces are large expanses of land that are mostly forests, and the Fulani people, by virtue of their nomadic nature over the centuries, I would say, they know these parts very well. And criminal gangs have now used those same routes and exploited these ungoverned spaces to carry out their activities. So the criminals themselves, probably just an handful if you compare them to the actual Fulani population. Of course, they might take cover under the Fulani population to carry out this act. But I don't think it's right to broadly, paint all the Fulanis with that same brush. Because I can tell you, there are records that show that even some of the Fulanis are victims of the activities of these criminals. We in Nigeria, or maybe the policymakers or the people who are the aim of affairs, it appears they do not actually do any kind of fiscal planning. I mean, that has been the case for decades anyway. I mean, you see cities sprawling out of proportion with no plan whatsoever. You can imagine that even metropolitan authorities in most of our cities are not saying, okay, this is the actual volume of water consumed by this city. Let's say Engr, for example. And okay, by 2 years' time, we are looking at a population growth of, say, 10%. And that 10%, we need additional water supply. How do we make up for that water supply? Things like that. That's just an example. No planning whatsoever. Things are just left to just, get out of control. Population get out of control. Like another example I will give quickly is, like, for example, in Lagos State, you see a large infiltration of people from all nooks and crannies of the country who are pursuing greener pastures, or they're pursuing that fortune that is supposed to be found in Lagos. And they come in, they don't have any accommodation, they stay in all kind of makeshift places. And this kind of people can easily become criminals. There seems to be incentive for crime in Nigeria. I'm saying so because a lot of times criminals don't even get caught. Crimes don't get solved conclusively. We hear of so many heinous crimes committed, and after a number of weeks, they just more or less literally get swept under the carpet. You don't just stop hearing about the cases. They just die out. Nobody is convicted. Nobody is brought to book, apart from maybe a few cases where maybe some very influential person is affected, and then they probably try to pursue solving the case to the conclusion. But if not, so that's an incentive right there. Everyone knows that there's an abundance of resources in Africa, starting from even like agricultural resources, because we know that we have a lot of fertile land, that don't require too much fertilization or irrigation to grow, even if it's annual farming. But why is it that if you take Akoko Edo, for example, if you go the whole length of Akoko Edo, you don't find any single factory. No single factory in the whole of Akoko Edo. If you move from Akoko Edo all the way, you won't see a factory until you get to maybe Okela in Esako local government. Or you get to Ewu, you see the Ewu cement, the Ewu flour mill. And these two factories that are in that area, they are not in Akoko Edo. Before, there used to be Ofin in Okwe, where they used to produce vegetable oil, and I think they used to manufacture wheelbarrows. And that provided a lot of employment for some of the local population and a source of income as well. So if you go the whole length of Akoko Edo with all the kind of resources available in Akoko Edo, from produce, agricultural produce, to naturally existing resources like let's say limestone or maybe some kind of minerals, then we should expect some kind of industry, one or two or three, to be situated there to derive value from these resources that are abundant in that locality, and also create employment and empower the people in that area. For example, I'm making an example with Akoko Edo, and I'm sure this same example applies to a lot of other parts of the country, So that is another thing to consider. So the resources that we have, we are not getting any value from it. Probably it's being extracted one way or the other. It's taken far away to distant climes, and that is where the value will be extracted. Because when it gets to that location, it will have to be processed and converted to another form that will be sold for money. So you see, there's now a value chain. That whole value chain has been lost to the source of the resource itself. This simple example applies to oil itself. Crude oil, for example, is the same thing. It's taken from one location and transported to another location to be refined. And at the place where it's being refined, it provides employment, meaningful, gainful employment to the people in that clime. So that value is for them to gain, not for us. You have a lot of people who have just finished school. They are just sat at home or doing things that they should be doing, things that are not productive. For example, let's look at it. Critically, riding an Okada, a graduate, he finished university, and they say, "Oh, empower him, give him an Okada." He's riding an Okada to make money. How is that productive? It is not productive. It's not in any way productive. He's riding an Okada. The Okada is riding is not manufactured here in Nigeria. It's manufactured somewhere else. The people that manufacture it will get the value. You are just riding it to carry somebody from here to there. And even Okada, the need for Okada as a means of transportation shows that there is no infrastructure. Shows that the infrastructure is not developed enough, because you can't see anywhere in the world. When you're talking about a proper system where Okada is a means of transportation. The global level, while Africa or Nigeria struggling with insecurity, the world is moving on. While we are fighting each other, killing each other, and when we are even killing each other, the insecurity, the weapons we are using, they are not manufactured here as well. If you take that example of the Okada as well, even the bullet and the gun that we are using up and down, there is no factory in Nigeria that's manufacturing these weapons, this grade of weapons. So the value of us even still killing ourselves is still to somewhere else. Somebody manufactured the gun and sells it to us, and we use it to kill ourselves. The person gains, he collects money, and we kill ourselves. So all those things, people should think about all those things. So there is also, look at the holistic picture, because there is nowhere apart from South Africa and maybe Egypt where weapons are manufactured on that scale. My take on Nigerian politics is that I think one of the problems we have in Nigerian politics is that we did not have time to actually grow a democracy because of countless military interventions. There was a truncation between the First Republic, truncated, cut short by military intervention. And the military, they ruled by edict. And they did not allow politicians to grow. And at some point, they say, we banned all politicians, we brought back all politicians. That's one of the problems. People don't understand it. Nigerian politics has not grown. The democracy, it has not matured. It has just gone off course. That's the problem. Because if you look in the past, the politicians, though they were still accused of corruption, they were exemplary because they lived modest lives. They lived modest lives. They were not like rulers. They were not affluent like that. Because I still remember, people that we know who were politicians, who were ordinary. We know their children. We know the way they lived. Some of them, after they left office, they went back to practice their professions. And some of them even were struggling to even make ends meet. So they did not really engage in the so-called graft that we're not aware of. Today, politicians of the day, they are untouchables. They are right up there. Even when they leave office, they don't. So I think what happened was that if democracy had been allowed to mature, if it had not been truncated several times by the military and eventually sort of, how will I say, corrupted, then maybe we should have been better for it. Some of the fact that in Nigeria all the time there's always the talk of, the previous government was better than the present one. Yeah, of course, that is to be expected because during the time of, say, Jonathan, for example, or Obasanjo, the population was not this much, inflation was not this much, so the pressure on the system was not this much. So when the next government comes, even with all the promises, and they do nothing, or they are doing exactly what the previous government does, then there will be no movement. The only movement will be backwards. Because, again, I will try to use an example. If you go to certain cities, they have maybe 5 networks of roads. And over 10 years, the 5 network of roads should have grown to maybe 7 or 8, 10 network of roads based on the population growth of that city. If you don't do that, the population is growing, inflation, costs, everything is going up, there's more pressure on the system, and you didn't do anything, you are doing the same thing you used to do, then definitely things will seem worse, even irrespective of which government comes or which promises that new government makes. It will only get worse. In the diaspora, there is strong conviction amongst a lot of groups, different groups, that the problem of Africa is being caused by a global conspiracy against Africa. Of course, you can easily understand why that is the deduction by these groups. Because, for example, Africa is the source of most mineral resources, that drive the global economy. You can mention many of them, like rubber, palm oil, cotton, groundnuts, lots of these natural resources, platinum, gold and diamonds. These things are found in Africa. So Africa, because of the way the Earth's crust was formed, according to geology, a lot of these things are concentrated in the African continent. And for that fact alone, we think Africa should be one of the richest continents. But it is not. So that's why there's this conspiracy theory that maybe because the world economy, the global economy cannot survive without these resources. And if Africa is developed like them, then Africa will probably sell those resources at a premium. And maybe because of that, Africa shouldn't be allowed to develop. And how do you do that? How do you achieve that? It's by making sure that Africa is insecure, that Africans are busy, at each other's throats continuously, while the rest of the world move forward. You know, that's a conspiracy theory, yes. But somehow you can sort of deduce how that conspiracy theory came about, or that line of thinking came about. A lot of the massive corporations that we have today, they all grew on the back of these resources. Yeah, you see the likes of the Cadbury, Lever Brothers, Procter and Gamble, the Michelins, the Firestones. These massive big companies, if you trace them, they all grew on the back of African resources. You know, like for example, Cadbury, Lever Brothers, they relied on groundnut and palm oil from Africa even before colonial times to grow into the big corporations they are today. So then, how come the source of these raw materials that drive the global economy? How come that same place is the poorest place on earth? A simple example is Congo, for example. Look at Congo. Congo is supposed to be the source of one of the most vital resources that is used to manufacture mobile phones. But Congo is one of the poorest countries in the world. You know, so that's so yes, it's possible. So there's that thinking that, oh, maybe these people are just trying to, because of course you see the flow of weapons itself. Weapons are manufactured in those places and they are brought to Africa. We use it to kill ourselves, and then we give them our resources for exchange of these weapons. And if you look at the whole of Africa, every country in Africa is either engaged in one conflict or the other. Corruption is not something that is invented in Africa or in Nigeria. Corruption is worldwide, global. But though because of the underdevelopment in Africa, it becomes very, very obvious. There's corruption in other countries. You know, some of these so-called governments that we like to make examples of, there's deep corruption in those places as well. But because of the underdevelopment in Nigeria, it becomes or in Africa rather, it becomes very, very obvious. Oh, this is corruption, it's corruption. But even that corruption itself, even the West, they contribute to it. Yeah, I wouldn't make any sort of claims or accusations, but there are things that I know. You know, like for example, if you look at the way some of the global multinationals operate in Africa, you know that they partake in corruption. They even encourage corruption, not until certain so-called laws were made in the US, you know, like the law regarding Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, they called it then, that now started catching some of these multinationals out, that we started hearing of it. We've heard of so many scandals in the past, like the Halliburton scandal, you know, so many scandals. So yes, corruption is not a sole preserve of any country. Yes, there is corruption in Africa. Yes, we know that, but let's not think that it is something that was invented in Africa. If we had enough time, we can go into it. I've read. There's a book I read which was very interesting, which actually sort of detailed and explained how corruption, or what they call dash, started in Africa during the colonial era. Yes.
And we also have with us tonight Mr. Peter Obi, who has joined us in for the service this evening. Hallelujah.
I'm aware of Peter Obi's candidature. I think he left the PDP and joined the Labour Party. Yeah, based on all I've heard him say so far, it looks like a quite, how would I put it, progressive candidate. You know, it's somebody that is sort of preaching a change, the much needed change in Nigeria. Actually, yes, it's quite an interesting candidate to myself, if you ask. My advice to Nigerians and Africans, both in Africa and in diaspora, is for us to stop quickly trying to explain things away, you know, with a very shallow conclusions. For example, you hear two people are fighting. Oh, it's one ethnic group A and B fighting. No, we need to dive into the root cause of most of these things. We need to look at the big picture, because what I think is that Africa is not aware of the game that's being played. There's a game that's being played. That game is not a game of race. It's not a game of race. It's not a game of name calling. It's an economic game. It's an economic game, and we are not playing it right. The reason I'm saying so is that we always think that the West is so benevolent, that the West gets it right. We look to the West. We look to the West as so superior. They know everything. They know what is right for us. But yet we don't stop to think and ask ourselves, why is it that this same West, why is it that the Chinese, they distrust the West so much, despite the fact that they do a lot of business with the West? Most of their market is in the West. But yet they distrust the West so much to keep a close society. In China has different ethnic groups as well, but they keep a very tight country and closed from the outside. Why do they do this? Because they are very suspicious of the West. It's the truth. And look at Russia, for example. Russia is also equally very suspicious of the West. That is why they did not want any Western influence in Ukraine, which culminated in this disaster that we have on our hands now, the invasion of Ukraine. So I'm just saying that. Just think about that. When people say, like we just answered the question of, is there a conspiracy theory against Africa, or does the West encourage corruption in Africa? You ask this question, people say, oh no, it's not possible. The West don't do that. The West they are clean. They don't do that. Africa is Africa's problem. Then look at China and Russia, the way they behave. Why do they behave that way? Why are they so distrustful of the West? Why do they keep such a close society? Why do they want to sort of remove all kind of Western influence from their societies? Like in China, you see some kind of laws that they make in China. They are totally in contrast to what the West call liberalism and whatever. So this thing is happening in Africa. Who is gaining from it? What does it mean for us in the coming years? We need to educate ourselves. We need to enlighten ourselves. We don't need to be jumping to conclusions to try to explain things away as black and white. It's not. It's deeper than that. And we should think about economics as well. How do we get value for us? How do we demand how do we demand for respect for ourselves? How do we demand for a good deed for ourselves? Because the way it is now, like we talked about crime, we talked about violence. Africans are exposed to violence, not only in Africa, everywhere in the world. Because you've seen how a lot of times in the news where you hear a black man was killed. I mean, it's only you hear black men being killed under the glare of the public. A black man will be killed the life will be snuffed out of a black man in the public with no consequences. It's only the black man that will be killed that way. It happens all the time. George Floyd. Then this one that happened in Italy recently. Then even in Spain, black men were beaten like animals, and 30 of them lost their lives. But it was not even mentioned in the mainstream media. So these things we should consider, especially the people living in diaspora, even in Africa. Think of it, and then you start to understand, because we need to ask for respect for ourselves.